Your brain didn't evolve to make you happy. It evolved to keep you from getting eaten, and it's still wildly overqualified at panic. Ancient humans weren't scared of nothing, by the way. They were scared of very specific things that were actively trying to ruin their day. Here's what we actually know. Number 6, the something is watching me fear. The fear that something is watching you from the dark is exactly as old as the dark itself. For most of human history, nighttime wasn't spooky ambience. It was prime time for predators, and not in a nature documentary way. More like a you are the documentary way. Our brains are wired to freak out harder about threats we can't see than ones we can. And that's not a flaw, it's a feature. Hesitate because you can't spot the lion and you become dinner. Big cats and other predators overlapped with humans for a very long time, and the archaeological record is blunt about it. Cave lion remains across Eurasia. Leopard kills near human campsites. Predator tooth marks directly on hominin bones. The dark wasn't empty. It was genuinely full of things that wanted to eat you. Imagine trying to look confident at night while still keeping an eye on every bush you don't trust. That's every one of us near a dark parking lot at midnight, running the exact same reflex as 100,000 years ago. Your body still runs this software. Hearing sharpens in low light, and your brain starts filling in threat shapes where there aren't any. That shadow in the corner isn't a monster, but your neurons are quietly running risk math just in case it is. Surviving the night was already a small victory. Breakfast could still kill you. Number 5, the oops. That berry was a mistake. Fear. Ancient humans didn't need horror movies. They had wild mushrooms and zero nutritional labels, and that was more than enough. We evolved strong disgust and taste aversion learning for exactly this reason. Eat something and get violently sick, and your brain stamps a permanent never again after just one experience. 1. That's not being dramatic. That's a survival feature built directly into the hardware, and it works so well, it can ruin a food for life. Archaeology backs this up in interesting ways. Residues in fossilized dental plaque show people were using medicinal plants far earlier than expected. That kind of knowledge doesn't appear by accident. It means someone had to eat the wrong thing first, and enough people survived long enough to pass the lesson on. The first person to eat a pufferfish was either a genius or the most dangerously confident person who ever lived. Honestly, nothing in between. Over time, that pressure built something bigger than individual survival. It pushed entire communities toward shared knowledge, which plants to avoid how long to cook something before it stopped being lethal. Early science just with considerably more vomiting involved. Your food might have been safe. The people around you, though? That's a different story. Number 4. Your cough is threatening my entire bloodline fear. Disease has always been terrifying, but it got a lot worse once humans started living close together, and agriculture made that a permanent condition. When you settle down, you don't just build a home. You build the perfect conditions for disease to spread. Ancient remains tell a grim story. Tuberculosis and leprosy show up in bones thousands of years old, and chronic parasitic stress was just a baseline condition of life for most people. Some of the immune system traits we carry today were shaped by long, brutal wars with pathogens that went on for millennia before anyone knew what a pathogen was. Once people settled, the problems compounded fast. Shared water sources, food, stored in tight spaces, livestock, living so close the line between barn and living quarters barely existed. And when trade routes started connecting distant communities, microbes got a fast travel system across continents. No algorithm required to doomscroll. One person sneezing in the communal breadline, and everyone already knew something bad was coming. So much of what eventually became religion and social tradition probably traces back to that exact dread. Rules about cleanliness, taboos around handling the dead, the instinct to isolate anyone who looked sick. People weren't being irrational. They were doing survival math with whatever tools they had. Disease kills fast. Starvation takes its time. Number 3. The hunger season that ate your whole year. Famine isn't a single bad day. It's a slow, grinding unmaking of an entire community that can stretch across months and the ancient record is very clear about how often it happened and how little room there was to maneuver. Food stress shows up directly in bones and teeth. Stress lines form during childhood malnutrition, and pollen records show exactly when drought cycles hit. When the climate shifted hard, people didn't get to adapt on their own terms. Some moved on and left everything they'd built behind. Some didn't make it out at all. In farming societies, the terror gets sharper because the dependency on a single harvest was so absolute. One fails, then the stored grain runs out. Then the animals start dying, and before long, you're sitting there doing grim arithmetic with the remaining mouths to feed. Modern people panic when the grocery store runs out of oat milk. Ancient people panicked when the sky forgot how to rain, and that gap in stakes is worth sitting with for a moment. All that fear of going hungry drove real innovation, though. Storage pits and irrigation systems were built out of desperation, not ingenuity for its own sake. Some historians think early bureaucracy, actual paperwork, was invented because people were terrified of losing track of grain. Tragic origin story, honestly, kind of iconic. Hunger can be survived together, but at some point, the most dangerous creature in the landscape wasn't an animal anymore. Number 2, the other humans are the predator realization. At some point, the most frightening thing in the landscape wasn't the lion anymore. It was the neighboring group who also had spears, and a specific reason to use them. The archaeological evidence for organized violence is hard to read around. Defensive settlements, mass graves with clear trauma marks, projectile points still embedded in bone. These weren't hunting accidents, and they don't look like isolated incidents either. They follow patterns of intentional repeated conflict that got worse as populations grew and resources got harder to share. When land and livestock became worth stealing, raiding became a strategy, and fear itself became a weapon. If you can terrify a village badly enough, you don't have to fight them every single time. That's what led to building your house inside a wall and still not being able to sleep. The threat hadn't gone away. It was just waiting. The cartoon version where cavemen are constantly clubbing each other is worth retiring. But when violence does show up in the record, it often looks disturbingly strategic, sometimes even ritualized, which is somehow worse than random chaos. It means the danger could plan ahead and hold a grudge across generations. All of those fears, the predators, the poison, the famine, the raids, you can at least point at them. But one doesn't have a shape. And every culture on Earth felt it, even when everything else was fine. Number 1, the dead don't stay dead fear. This one sits at the top for a reason. It's not really about dying. It's about the possibility that death isn't a full stop, and that what's gone might find its way back across that line. Across ancient societies, we keep finding rituals designed specifically to keep the dead from returning. Stones weighing bodies down, heads placed between the legs, iron pinned near the chest. Later, graves were carefully reopened so skulls could be removed and reburied somewhere else entirely. Nobody goes through that kind of trouble because they're relaxed about the afterlife. And it wasn't one region or one culture. Ancestor veneration and boundary rituals show up in completely unrelated societies worldwide, which says something real about how we're wired. Death is the biggest unanswered question there is, and the mind does what it always does. When it hits a wall, it builds a story to fill the silence. The first haunted house was probably some hut where someone heard a raccoon and immediately decided Grandpa was back for revenge. Burial rites went further than the fear alone ever could. They created community memory. Mourning rituals gave people a way to process grief together, rather than alone, and even the darkest stories offered a kind of script for the unthinkable, a way to hold it when everything falls apart. In these traditions, the dead aren't just frightening. They carry weight, and every ancient culture seemed to understand that on a level deeper than anything they could put into words. These fears weren't childish or primitive. They were accurate because they reflected real threats. And the ones that stopped being useful didn't disappear when we stopped needing them. Your startle reflex still fires the same way it did 100,000 years ago. A floorboard creaks at the wrong hour, and your brain's already filling in the gaps. These fears can be named now. That does change things, not because it makes them disappear, but because they stop running the show.